Number 8 is a problem that's not specific to the Leon Cupra. It can affect a number of Volkswagen Group vehicles, but it's super annoying and therefore well worthy of inclusion here. Hello guys, and welcome back to the Volks Wizard channel. Now, with the cost of living taking big chunks out of our disposable incomes, good value cars have never been more important, and the Mark III Leon Cupra has always been a bit of a bargain hot hatch. And with prices finally starting to soften after the post-COVID boom, it's about to become the best value it's ever been. Plus, the nights are drawing in, the clocks have gone back, and for the next couple of months, the used car market goes into a state of semi-hibernation. So it's usually the best time to grab a bargain. But for a car to be good value, you have to make sure you've bought yourself a proper one. And that's where I come in. In this video, I'm going to give you all the information you need to bag yourself a mint Mark III Leon Cupra. But before we get started, I'd like to say a big thanks to everybody that has subscribed to the channel. It does mean an awful lot. If you haven't yet though, please do so. Just click that famous red button, or there's a link in the description of the video below. It could be the difference between this channel being around in 2023 and not, and that's because I've noticed recently a number of manufacturers, some of which are within the Volkswagen Group, will not lend cars to small channels like this one that offer fair and balanced criticism. They'd rather lend them to influencers that just tell you everything is brilliant, and that's because they don't need to lend cars to small channels like this one. Why have your car criticised, however fairly, by someone like me when you could just say no? And the only way to counter that is to make this channel as strong as possible, and every like, every view, and particularly every sub will go a long way towards doing that. And also, you'll make sure that reviews on YouTube are fair and balanced, and not just basically a bit of sponsored advertising via an influencer who just says everything is fantastic. Right, let's now get on to the very complicated model history of the Mark III Leon Cupra. UK cars arrived in 2014, and there were two models at launch, the Cupra 265 and the Cupra 280. They were priced at £26,000 and £27,000 respectively. To give you some context, the recently launched Mark 7 Golf R started at £29,990, so they both comfortably undercut that. The 265 Cupra was only available with 3 doors and a manual gearbox, and instead of the 280's 19-inch wheels, it got 18s. But it's still got the 280's dynamic chassis control. It has the same size brakes, which was 340mm front, 310 back. Okay, it lost a bit of gloss black trim inside, and navigation was now an option, which was £525 extra. And it got body coloured mirrors instead of black, the 280, but the 0 to 60 time was just 0.1 seconds slower, 5.9 versus 5.8. However, even though they were that close on paper, it still made more sense for most people to buy the 280. Because you could have that as a manual or DSG. DSG was a £1,300 extra, and you could also have it as a 5-door for £300 extra. In early 2015, you could also have a Cupra Estate, and that was also 265 and 280. It was roughly a £1,000 premium over the 5-door hatch. Bucket seats were a £1,250 option from July 2014 and included heating, which was also available separately as part of a winter pack. Black, white and orange lines were offered, which gave you coloured mirror casings, grille surround, wheels and rear Cupra badging. There were also black and orange sub 8 packs to celebrate the Leon taking the Nordschleife front wheel drive lap record from the Renault Megane Trophy 265. These got standard Brembo calipers with 370mm two-piece brake discs. They got 19-inch multi-wheels, which were essential to clear those massive brake calipers, and they got really handsome side skirts, all for just £2,050. You could also spec Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 semi-slick tyres for a pretty reasonable £460. There was also an Ultimate Sub 8 edition, which lost the air conditioning and some other minor bits, but it got Cup 2s as standard, and that was a £4,250 option, and is really, really rare. In mid-2015, the 280 went up to 290, and the unpopular 265 was dropped. From May 2016, the Cupra Black arrived, and that came as standard with bucket seats, black line trim, and the multi wheels, which had previously been used on the Sub 8, but you didn't get the sill covers of the Sub 8. The Cupra Black was a £1,755 premium on top of the normal Cupra 290, but 1,250 of that was accounted for by those lovely bucket seats. In early 2017, the range was facelifted, and these later cars are known as the Mark 3.5. Leon's, the manual gearbox, lived on alongside DSG until late 2017. Initially, these facelift cars had 300 horsepower, but by 2018 they were back to 290 due to WLTP emissions regulations. The first batch of facelift cars still had analog instrument gauges. It wasn't until early 2018 this had been upgraded to the digital instrument cluster. The main infotainment screen went up from 6.5 inches to 8 inches, and inside the white trim on seats and door cards was swapped for a carbon fibre effect version. There was also now a piano black panel at the base of the gear shifter. It wasn't until the next revisions to the range for 2019 when the estate became the 300 horsepower 4-drive version, which was now a perfect match for the Golf R estate. You could also now order a Lux Pack, which gave you the bucket seats, adaptive cruise control, keyless entry and the safety pack. These later cars are distinguished by the copper badging on them, which was a precursor to the Cupra branding, which came in 2020 with the Mark IV. We had two special editions as well towards the end of the run. In 2018 we had the 310 horsepower Leon Cupra R, of which only 799 were made. 24 came to the UK. They were manual only. I did a video on that car a few years ago, so I'll put a link in the description of the video below. The UK also got 150 Cupra R ST estates. They still were 300 horsepower like the normal model, but they had some lovely carbon trim on them, the Brembo brakes, additional negative camber just like a Mark 7 Golf GTI Club Sport S, and the best bit was for £500 you could have a warranty friendly apt tuning pack which increased the horsepower to 350. That gave it a 0 to 60 time of just 4.7 seconds, which was the same as the Focus RS at the time. Okay, it was £35,000, which was a lot of money back then, but it was a car that was largely under the radar. In fact, it was only really the copper bits that gave it away, and they could easily be reversed. Right, now let me give you 10 top buying tips so you can buy your own. Okay, starting at number 10 then, and forgive me for stating the bleeding obvious, but the Mark III Leon Cupra is a sporty car with sporty seats, and they're very heavily padded and can therefore wear prematurely. You probably could have worked that out for yourself, right? But the reason I've included this in this guide is because there's a particular problem with the pre-facelift Cupra where this white piece of fabric here by the driver's thigh can crack, and it does it at very, very low mileages. It's going to be very hard to find a car on the market now. They're 5 to 6 years old, the youngest ones, that doesn't have this cracking, and it affects whether it's the normal seat or the bucket seats in this car because the base is pretty much identical. Now this car's done 57,000 miles. At this point I don't think it's worth dealing with yet, but if you're looking to buy one, first thing you should do is ask the owner to tell you how bad it is, maybe get them to send you a photo, because I could imagine cars that have done more miles or had more wear and tear, this could be a very unsightly hole on the seat fabric, and if you're a little bit fussy, like I'm sure most of you guys are, you won't be very happy with that. And if you've got to get it repaired, I'm sure it can be repaired, then try and factor that into the price you pay for the car. Okay, at number 9, let's talk about modifications, because I think compared to the equivalent Golf A3 or Octavia, you're much more likely to find a modified Leon Cupra on sale. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to find out what's been done. Now, generally, when I'm looking at cars for sale, I kind of assume they're standard unless something tells me otherwise, whether it's the owner directly or the picture tells me something's been changed under the bonnet. But I think with the Leon Cupra, it's best to assume they've been modified unless you're told that they're completely stock, because the stock car is so rare. So yeah, have a look at the photos. Is there a cone filter? Is there an R600 air intake like this one? Is there a splitter on the car? These are all clues that it's been modified. And the most important hidden one is a remap. Now this car's a 280. I think it's plenty fast for a front wheel drive car. So yes, remapping 4-wheel drive cars like the Golf R S3 does make a lot of sense, but I'm not sure it's as sensible to do that to these. So find out for sure if it's got one, and if it has, then test drive it and see if if the traction is there or whether it just drives you crazy with wheel spin, because the VAQ diff, which we'll talk about later, can only do so much. Number 8 is a problem that's not specific to the Leon Cupra. It can affect a number of Volkswagen Group vehicles, but it's super annoying and therefore well worthy of inclusion here. Now, in their infinite wisdom, Volkswagen Group thought it was a good idea to insert a little bag full of silicon granules into the coolant header tank on some vehicles. The reason for that was because the bag would emit silicon into the cooling system, slowly extending its longevity. A great idea, but they didn't think about what would happen if that bag was to split, and believe you me, it does split and it does cause havoc to the cooling system. The thing to look out for when you're test driving a car like this is to make sure you've got good heat from the car's heater, because when the bag splits, the granules get stuck in the heater matrix, preventing flow, and you don't get any heat. And that can be very, very expensive to sort out. You can't flush it without taking everything apart. You have to take the heater matrix out of the car to clean it. That can cost many hundreds of pounds. Another thing to do it before you test drive the car, is to take the lid off the coolant expansion tank and look in there and to see if you can see the bag. I have actually just put my finger on mine. I actually thought it had been taken out, but it's there, and it's a bit difficult to get out, but it's in the corner between the plug and the outlet here, and it just feels like a tea bag. You can tell if your car has got the silicon because it says mit silicat on the expansion tank, with silicon. And there it is. I genuinely thought this was no longer in there because I did a visual inspection. Only when I was filming this video that I noticed it was still there, because I put my finger in between the plug and the outlet pipe. Obviously, if you're going to do this on your own car, make sure the coolant is cold. And I could feel something squidgy. It's basically a tea bag full of silica granules. Now, to get it out, you have to kind of pull it through a tight space, and I kind of got it with 2 screwdrivers like chopsticks and pulled it out with some pliers at the end of it, and it was, you know, under some strain. It still hasn't split. So they can be quite durable, but maybe there's an issue with certain years of production, and that's what causes them to split. If you split yours taking it out, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. Just don't start the engine, take the header tank off. It's just a couple of screws, and wash it out and you'll be okay. Yeah, so we don't need that anymore. Now, I know what you're thinking, Volkswagen put that in there for a reason, Volkswagen Group. Well, the reason is to extend the life of the coolant, but what they didn't think of was that there is another problem on this engine that means you're probably going to change your coolant earlier than expected anyway, but we'll talk about that later. Stay tuned. Okay, now let's talk wheels and tyres. Now, apart from on the 265 model, every Leon Cupra came with 19-inch wheels. That means there's a lot of metal there you can damage. Don't worry too much about curbing, that's relatively inexpensive to fix, even though they are diamond cut. A much bigger issue is cracking. Now, I'm sure you can crack even the strongest of wheels if you try hard enough, but there does seem to be a particular problem with the multi-wheels fitted to the Sub-8s and the Cupra Blacks. Seat called them, when the Sub-8 came out, a racing wheel, which usually means it's light and therefore not very strong. So it would make sense that they do crack a lot more easily than your average wheel. If you're looking at a car with those wheels, then you do need to be cautious. It's going to be pretty hard to tell if they're cracked when you're on a test drive. They could look perfectly good from the front. The cracks tend to be on the inner edge. Generally, the time people notice is when they've got the car home, and after a few days the tyre pressure warning system pipes up to say a wheel has lost pressure. Hopefully just one of them, potentially it could be all 4, and that's quite a problem because they're between £700 and £1,000 each, depending what colour you go for. I gather the orange ones are a lot more expensive. That's how this car ended up on these wheels. These are Racing Line R360s. They fit the Leon Mark III perfectly, and they're £1,400 the set, so £350 each, and you can buy them individually if you just need the odd one. So yeah, if you bought it from the dealer and that does happen, you go to a tyre place and they can't find anything wrong with the tyre, and a good tyre place should be able to spot the crack, then get back onto the dealer very, very quickly, because you should not be being sold by a good dealer a car with a cracked wheel or even a welded wheel. There have been reports of welded wheels failing, so it's not necessarily a permanent fix. It all depends how bad the crack was. Obviously, if it's your own car and you found you've got a cracked wheel and it's not under warranty or any sort of come back, then by all means go to a good refurbisher who should be able to weld the wheel to a high standard, and if that works, then great. Now let's talk about tyres. This is a very powerful front wheel drive car, and it should have really good tyres. It's only modern tyre technology that's made these cars drivable. So if you go to see one and it's got budget tyres or it's got mixed tyres, particularly on the same axle, then you should be very wary of how the owner has looked after the car. What you really want is a good set of modern high performance tyres like the Goodyear Eagle F1 Super Sport that would transform this car compared to the original Continentals a lot of them came with. So you need to reckon about £500 for a decent set of tyres, and then you'll be able to enjoy your Cupra to the full. Okay, at number 6, let's talk about the Cupra's standard DCC dynamic chassis control adaptive dampers. These are brilliant to have because they make the car so much more usable compared to a car on passive dampers. Problem is, when they go wrong, it's about twice the price to fix. The good news is it's quite unusual for these things to fail, but I have heard of a few instances on this particular model where the near side front shock fails, and it's too much to be a coincidence. Now, it is actually quite hard to tell when you're going to see a car as a buyer if you've got problems with the shocks. You can by all means put the car on full lock, have a look at the fronts with a torch, see if you can see moisture on them on a dry day, pointless doing it on a wet day, or go on a long test drive on a bumpy road. This car's famous for its road holding. It should be really poised and agile, even in comfort mode. If it feels all over the place or you're getting banging from the shocks, then you've definitely got a problem with the DCC. Also, even rarer, you might see a warning light on the dashboard warning about a fault with the suspension. That could be even more expensive to fix than just replacing a damper. Okay, at number 5, let's talk brakes then, because it's always an important feature of a performance car. Luckily, the Mark III Cupra is quite light, and Seat only used relatively mundane components. At the front, we've got 340mm single-piece discs. At the back, we've got 310s. Now, they're relatively inexpensive. They're also fitted to the Golf R and Golf GTI Performance, so they're quite easy to get. But even so, you still don't want to be the person having to foot the bill for replacing all of them, because that would be quite a few £100. So yeah, do have a good look at them. If the car you're looking at though has Brembo written on the calipers, then you need to listen really carefully now, because when Seat fitted the performance pack with those brakes, they went to Audi Sport for the discs, and if you've ever owned an Audi RS, you'll know they never have cheap brake components, and you'd be looking at about £500 for the 2 discs, which is probably about 2 to 3 times the cost of the discs on the standard model. They're 370mm. If you're going on track, maybe you might look out particularly for a car with those brakes, but I wouldn't necessarily look too hard, because there is an inherent problem with them in that the front brake discs are the same part number whichever side of the car they're on, and that means the vents that are within the disc only work correctly on the one side. So they're probably quite fine for the road, but on track you'll find one side overheats much more than the other, and that will damage the discs. So even if you're not looking at going on track, but you come across the car with those discs that has been on track, then you need to be really careful. Again, it's not the end of the world, but you just need to make allowances so you're not footing a massive bill after you've bought the car. Now, when you're buying a house, it's all about location. With a used car, it's all about history. So point number 4 is to have a good look at the service history of the car you're thinking about buying. It's particularly important with a performance car like the Cupra, which is often bought by younger owners on finance who can't also afford to maintain it correctly, even though it's actually quite a cheap car to maintain. Now, when you go to see a car, the owner should present you with a service book if the car came with one. I can't remember if they ever deleted the service book and went purely to digital records, but anyway, you should get this. If you don't get this, you should get the complete record printout that was issued when the car was last serviced, which will tell you every time it was recorded digitally. If the car's been serviced at a garage that can't record it digitally, and by the way, that doesn't have to be a main dealer, independents can do it as well, as long as they sign up for the service, which is actually free. If it hasn't been to them, then all the owner can give you is the receipts for the work done, and that's actually not bad, because you want receipts really for the digital record and actually to back up the stamps in the service book. Anyway, get whatever you've got and have a good look through it. There shouldn't really be oil changes beyond a year or 10,000 miles. Some cars are subject to extended oil change intervals. It's not the end of the world, but it's not ideal. If the car's really good otherwise, then I wouldn't worry too much about it, but I'd definitely shorten those intervals to up to 10,000 miles, because this is a performance car. It does run hot, it does get through the oil, though luckily these EA 888s have got quite a lot of oil in them, so they don't sludge up as easily as they did on some of the older cars when extended intervals came in. As well as oil for the engine, we have oil for the DSG gearbox, if you have got a DSG gearbox in the one you're looking at. 6 speeds are 40,000 miles for the oil change, and 7 speeds, I gather, I've checked this on the Golfs, it's 80,000 miles, which came as a pleasant surprise to me. As well as engine oil and gearbox oil, all Cupras, whether they're front wheel drive or 4-wheel drive, have got Haldex components that also need regular oil changes, and this is little known that the VAQ front coupling is actually made by Haldex. It's effectively a Haldex coupling for the front axle, and the official interval is 30,000 miles on those, but the oil can sludge up just as it can on the back on some cars much sooner than that, particularly if the car's driven hard. If you're using it on track, haldexrepairs.co.uk say you should change the oil every 2,000 miles. Even the 30,000 interval is often overlooked by dealer workshops and independents, and probably some specialists as well. It's quite unknown, so check for that. That's really, really important on the test drive. Make sure the car's got reasonable traction. It will still spin the front wheels with a VAQ diff, but it should be grippier than you might expect, particularly when you're coming out of a corner in the wet, applying the throttle. You should feel the car actually tighten its line rather than push wider. I'm not sure I want people testing that if they test drive a car I'm selling, but you get the drift. With the 4-drive models, which came towards the end of the run estate only for the UK market, you've got Haldex coupling on the back, same as the one in the Mark 7 7.5 Golfs, and that suffers the same problems. 3-year 30k intervals on those, probably not quick enough for most of them really, particularly if the car's been driven hard and the rear coupling's been working a lot, so you end up with sludging there. You also end up with the pre-charge pumps packing up. They're not a very expensive components, they look pretty feeble, and they're on most of the time pre-charging the Haldex system in case it needs to engage rear drive. So if you've got a 4-wheel drive car, you definitely should not be getting any wheel spin, so make sure you test that on a test drive. Ideally, plug diagnostics in and see if there are any faults regarding the 4-wheel drive system. But the 4-drive cars actually came right at the end of the run, so you might even find some of them are actually still in warranty, but one to look out for as they get older. Now at number 3, we're going to talk bodywork, and this is the first in one of my buying guides. I've never covered this before because it's such a massive area. I could fill a whole hour-long video telling you what to look for, but I'll give you some top tips today because I feel that the Mark 3 Leon Cupra is particularly prone to accidents and bad repairs just because it's a powerful front-wheel drive car, often with younger owners. Now before we have a look at the paintwork under the bonnet, have a quick look at the inner wings because they're date stamped. These are 30th 15, which means 30th week of 2015. It's a late 2015 reg, so that's right, they should be a few months before the car was registered. If they're after the date of registration, then it's either had new inner wings or it's a ringer, neither of which is a good outcome. While you're under the bonnet, have a look for overspray on all the black plastic parts, particularly easy on a white car, and have a look at the inside of the outer wings. They should be grubby like they are on this car. If one's cleaner than the other, then chances are it's had a new wing. When it comes to the paintwork, the best tip I can give you is to look at the car in the shade. This is way too bright for looking at a white car. All the imperfections are just washed out with the glare. So put it in the shade and have a look for overspray. It's a really good thing about white or red. It stands out like a sore thumb, so particularly here where the A-pillar meets the wing. On the window rubbers, particularly this one where the body shops wouldn't like to remove this to paint the car. Something I like to do when I'm seeing cars in the wet is open the doors and feel the door shuts. If the quarter panel has been painted, quite often the body shop will leave a really hard line where the new paint finishes and the old paint starts. Really easy to get rid of that, but they very rarely do it, and that's a good clue that the quarter panel has been painted. Obviously it's not the end of the world if it has, but you just need to see how bad it is or was. Best thing to do, get down low and have a look down the side of the car. You're looking for smooth panels. All modern cars have got some orange peel to the paint, so there should be some of that. but you don't want any ripples because that's either filler or door dents, and door dents are quite easy to fix. Filler is a real problem. Another similar tip I see old boys doing at auctions is to feel the back of the bonnet, because this edge here is often quite rough. If the bonnet's been repainted, it's beautifully smooth on this car. If you're not sure what you're doing, it's always a good idea to take an expert with you or take the car to a specialist for a good going over, because making a mistake here could cost you many thousands of pounds. Now earlier I mentioned there was no point extending the life of the coolant with a silica bag because it doesn't stay in the engine for that long anyway, and I was referring then to fault number 2, which is to do with a leaking thermostat and water pump module. I've talked about this at length before with regards to the Golf GTIs, Mark 7 and the Mark 7 Golf R. Well, this is basically a Mark 7 Golf R engine, so it applies equally to this, and it's not a 1 off or 100 off. I'm pretty sure every engine will suffer this leak within the first 5 years. I think there should have been a recall, but they haven't done that, probably because it would cost them a lot of money in dealer labour charges to do this, because it's nestled under the inlet manifold, and that's where you put parts that don't fail, not ones that do within a few years. When this engine came out in Gen 1 format, the AAA, as in say the Mark 6 Golf GTI, there's no problem with leaks on those. It's just on this Gen 3, so I presume somebody's cheapened something off, and that's caused this massive problem. A few will have been caught under warranty, but generally they happen a little bit later. As a buyer, how can you tell? Well, first thing you do is look at the header tank when the car's cold. It should be above minimum. If it's not above minimum, coolant doesn't go anywhere else, it just leaks. So if it's below minimum, there is a leak. Maybe the owner hasn't noticed and topped it up. If they're switched on, they'll top it up so you don't notice. All you can do then really, and apart from lifting the car up and looking for the pink drops and stains under the car, is to smell. Coolant has a very distinctive smell. If you're not sure what it is, go to your car. If it's got this pink coolant, it's a Volkswagen Group car of the same era, open the header tank when it's cold, have a smell, get familiar with that smell, and then come back from your test drive when the engine's really hot, see if you can smell that smell. If you can, there will be a leak, and you need to factor the cost of replacement into buying the car. Specialist, I think it's about £600, main dealers about £1,000. So yeah, definitely something to look out for. Well guys, here we are at number 1. Have you guessed what it is yet? I think if you know anything about Volkswagen Group hot hatches from this era, you'll have a good idea of what it is, because it's pretty obvious and it's not been included in the last 9. It is, of course, the clutch. For some reason, Volkswagen Group decided to put undernourished clutches in Leon Cupra's Golf GTIs and Golf Rs. Golf Rs came off worst because, being four-wheel drive, they do try and transmit all that power to the road rather than spinning, and the clutch does take a battering. At least with the front-wheel drive cars, wheel spin does protect the clutch, but Golf Rs used to chew through clutches in 8,000 miles. I've seen it happen. With the Cupras, they should be a lot better, but they're now, going to be doing an average of like having done 50,000 miles. They're going to be at a point where the clutch could be slipping, and it may not be immediately obvious when you drive the car that it slips. So you need to drive it specifically in a way that will cause it to slip. So third gear, 20 miles an hour, just over 1,000 revs, give it full throttle. It will lag, but when it builds up boost at 2,000 and 2,500, it's that build up of the boost that will cause the clutch to slip. Now try it in fourth as well, obviously watch the speed, and you want it to just, and if the revs don't rise disproportionately to the road speed, then the clutch isn't slipping. You also need to give the car a good long test drive, but concentrating on keeping it in a high gear and using a lot of throttle and feeling the boost build up. And it's no guarantee, because in the early stages it can be really easy to miss, but yeah, if you do that, you'll know if the clutch is slipping really, really badly. If it is, you need to factor in about £700 to £1,000 to get it sorted. It's about £1,000 at a dealer. I think you can get it done less elsewhere. You're going to be given the option of a genuine clutch, an aftermarket genuine equivalent clutch, or an uprated clutch. Always take the uprated clutch if you've got a Golf R or a Leon Cupra. There has been some chatter on forums about something called crank walk, where uprated clutches damage the crankshaft, but that seems to be restricted to the lower power EA AAA engine. So if you've got a Cupra or an R, always get the uprated clutch. Well guys, hopefully these 10 tips will help you bag yourself a bargain Leon Cupra winter will soon be upon us, and that's a really good time to get yourself a good deal on a car. And if you buy yourself a good one, you'll get yourself one of the best bargain hot hatches there is. As ever guys, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. Please do comment. I do try and read and reply to them all, and please do subscribe, as I mentioned earlier. That's really important right now, and I'll see you for the next one very soon.